Hello and welcome back to the channel. Very excited to be bringing you episode 3 of Anatomy of a Classic, the series where we look at a classic album and we break it down in a bit more depth than we are able to on the discography rankings. So this is a bit of an interesting one. Vanessa, you will recognize, of course, from several videos she has appeared on the channel, the Harry Nilsson ranking, the Wilco ranking, the Uncle Tupelo ranking, now the albums and songs of the year. Andrew also joining me. You appeared in our end of year extravaganza as well last year, so it's good to have you on an episode proper. And yeah, I've brought the two Canadians over to talk about Hounds of Love by Kate Bush, which, yeah, I mean, it's kind of an interesting one. You know, when I think there's a certain demographic of people, and I was definitely one of these people for a long time, where when you think of a classic album, it's from like 1967 to 1975. That's kind of like very, strict parameters for it to be a classic. And this doesn't fall into that. This is an album from 1985, but I think given its longevity and especially we'll talk about, last year, especially, it was the album was number one, and as was its lead single. It's definitely standing the test of time. So I don't think you can argue that this deserves discussion on this series. So yeah, I guess we'll kick off as we always do with our personal experience with the album, and I'll go first. It was one of those like classic albums that I was aware of for a long time. Seeing the album cover everywhere and hearing the name Kate Bush and being like, I for a long time I only knew Wuthering Heights, and for a long time I didn't like that song. So that sort of made me really think that I didn't like Kate Bush. But obviously I love the song now. I think it was just the sort of very theatrical vocals that I was like, oh my god, this is crazy. I was listening to, like, I don't know, Foo Fighters at that time. I didn't want any crazy vocals like that. But when I did listen to it, I think in 2020, which was when when the pandemic hit, I was really getting into music and exploring all these classics and stuff. And it really was love at first listen for me. I was already head over heels in love with the similarly structured Low and Heroes from David Bowie, where you have sort of a more poppy side and a less poppy side. But I think this album, the differences between the sides are less drastic, which also struck me at the time. But yeah, I mean, it's been a 10 out of 10 album for me since the first time I heard it. One of those rare first listen, just this is special. So yeah, it's my favorite Kate Bush album as well. Spoilers. So yeah. Vanessa, what about you?
Well, my history goes back a little longer. I think I heard Running Up That Hill like when I was a kid. Like, I used to really watch a lot of Much Music when I was first getting into music. And for people who don't know, that's like the Canadian MTV. And back when I was a kid, they actually still played music. And I remember they had these things called 80s weekends. So they would just play all 80s music videos for an entire weekend. And I remember the video for Running Up That Hill because it was just so striking and so different. And like it even stood out to me at that time. And that's all I really knew for a long time. And then probably maybe like 5-6 years later, we had a satellite channel called Much More Retro where they played all old videos. And Cloud Busting was a regular staple of that. So that really got me interested in the album because really, I don't know that I knew much about the actual album before that. I just kind of knew of her as the Running Up the Hill lady, and I knew Wuthering Heights. But so I checked it out. I think I got a hold of it onto my computer at some point in the mid 2000s, like 2006, 2007. And I had like a bonus track version. So it had all the B-sides and a lot of remixes and stuff. And I really gravitated towards side one and a lot of the bonus tracks, but I had some struggles with that second side at that time. So that's taken me a little longer to get into, but I love it now. Spoilers. But yeah, it's one of my top albums of all time at this point. And it is also my favorite Kate Bush. I mean, by a very small margin. I love a lot of her classic period, a lot, like a lot of 9s and 10s for me. So it is at the top just by a little bit, but it's still, it goes that extra mile to go to the top. And yeah. it's going to be fun to discuss it today.
Andrew, what about you? How did you find out about this gem of an album?
Yeah, I guess I got to start with being introduced to Kate Bush in general. First song for me there was Wow, courtesy of the Vice City soundtrack, which has had an uncomfortably high impression on my music discoveries from kind of that era. I liked that song, but I'm not sure I was ready for the kind of artist she was at the time. I was probably only 12, 13 years old then. But over the years, I gradually introduced myself to other Kate Bush, pretty much starting with the Hounds of Love singles on here, starting with the title track, actually, after hearing more acclaim for the record and everything. And I was really drawn to the style she was doing on this record in particular. And then just over time, just gradually has emerged into kind of, one of my favorite albums. Certainly my favorite album of that year, one of the top ones of the 80s for sure.
I guess Vanessa and I can't reveal if it's our favorite album of 1985 yet. You're gonna have to wait. But yeah, so I think it's a very interesting record to look at, sort of the conception of it, the concept of it, and all that kind of stuff. I think you could categorize the A side as this like really incredibly densely produced pop. Obviously, our pilot episode of this series was on So by Peter Gabriel, and I think that A side has a lot of similarities to what he would do the year after in terms of this like incredibly sort of layered but polished at the same time, but without sounding artificial, using a lot of different styles of music mixed together. And it's not like a sellout album. It's the folky wackiness of the dreaming is still somewhere in here. There's like the song Jig of Life especially, but also moments in The Big Sky as well, which is the most radio friendly pop song, but there are some odd moments in there which really she shows her personality so much. It was recorded partly in her home and partly in Ireland, which perhaps explains some of the Irish folk influence, and she spent 2 years perfecting on it and working on it. So yeah, some critics have categorized it as post-progressive in its genre, because Kate Bush voices themes of love and womanly passion rather than the usual male viewpoints associated with progressive rock. So that's kind of an interesting take on it, I thought. So yeah, that's kind of what I got. It's kind of an interesting album. I think obviously she as a person very much not interested in the limelight. So I think a lot of this stuff you kind of have to dig to find out stuff about her music. But yeah, obviously you have the A side, Hounds of Love, and the B side, The Ninth Wave, the sort of conceptual suite about a woman drifting alone in the sea at night. So yeah, I guess it kind of makes sense. We usually start with the lead single and then go on to the opening track. And for the first time, that's the same song. And I think if you're going to talk about this album, this is the only song you can start talking about first, whether it's your favorite song on the album or not. Running Up That Hill is one of the great pop songs of all time, in my opinion. I think it is just flawless. It's almost like this sort of scientifically perfect pop song, like I was saying similar things about Peter Gabriel. Sort of maybe stripping back some of her less palatable quirks, but it's still got a lot of personality, and it's really, artistically intact, I think. And yeah, I mean, it's obviously with Stranger Things last year as well, it had a big resurgence in popularity. So yeah, I mean, I doubt any of us are going to say anything bad about Running Up That Hill, are we? But yeah, so yeah, what do you guys, the song in general, what are your sort of thoughts about it? What's your history with it?
Well, it was my first impression of her. So it had a big impact. I mean, it took a little while for it to really have a major impact, but I thought it was cool at the time. And the music video too helped that. Like, this song had an impact, but there was so much, the visualization, like, it stuck in my mind. Like, you can still picture it from that time, seeing it for the first time. So that's pretty cool. One thing I was thinking about last night when I was re-listening to everything, it was like, it sounds like the 80s, but it also sounds timeless at the same time. Like it's got this weird quality where, yes, you know it was made in the mid 80s, but it's not like, I don't know, like Aha, which is an awesome song. Like Take On Me, I love it, but that could only come out at one time. This, it just almost feels like it could come out at any time too. Like it's just that it's got a timeless quality to it. And I think that's why it resonated so much with people last year, people who were totally unfamiliar, how it just, they all gravitated towards. So yeah, it's an amazing song. And I can never get sick of it. Like even with all that resurgence, often stuff like that will really turn me off, even songs that I really love, but it didn't have that effect this time. So I'm happy because I was a little worried, but yeah, definitely a cool song.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of with you on that last point. It hasn't soured on me at all, despite its resurgence. Yeah.
Yeah, and speaking for myself, I really worry about radio ruining things for me because I did hear it a lot last year, not by choice. But I guess if you're going to hear a song, you want it at this level. It's almost hard to talk about it. It feels like a power move opening up the record with like basically a masterpiece. You're putting yourself at risk by the rest of the world living up to something this epic. Lots of amazing production choices and these like melodic turns that she has in there just kind of blow me away, especially like the first couple times I heard the song, especially that chorus. So, I mean, it was like a solid hit in its time and became this bona fide chart topper much later. But I think it's kind of a testament to its quality that it wasn't just kind of this fluke, oh, here I'm popping up one week and going away the next. It lasted for months. And I think that speaks to kind of the quality and the timelessness of it.
Yeah, I think the production is very good, but the songwriting on that is just incredible. Like there's so many memorable hooks, and yeah, the chorus especially is just undeniable. So yeah, you're probably bored about hearing about that song now, but we're going to move on. Don't worry. Two, bit of a different route. Favorite deep cut, which there are 4 singles for this album, all on the A side, or every song on the A side except Mother Stands for Comfort was a single. So bit of a lesser pool of accessible songs. I feel like whatever we pick, it's going to be something a bit less, you know, polished and poppy. The song I went for was And Dream of Sheep, which opens up the B-side, which, I don't know, it's basically just a straight up piano ballad, which after her debut and Lionheart, I suppose, Kate doesn't really do that much. So when she does, I really appreciate it. It's just played completely straight. It's so tender. To me, it's maybe her best ever vocal performance. And she is one of my favorite singers. So it really does get me every time. And there's some really nice, subtle production touches as well, like really nice sort of acoustic guitar strums that come in. But yeah, that piano and her voice, it all just works together so well. It's quite a short track, and it kind of gives you a false sense of security before the craziness of side 2. So yeah, my close second place would be to Jig of Life, which I think is just epic. So yeah, that's my deep cut.
So I'm actually going to go with something that comes right after, Under Ice, which is my favorite. I think it's just such a cool song. Like it takes you right into that dream. Like you feel like you're in a dream, which you're supposed to. And it's not just her lyrics or anything that evokes that feeling. Like the whole song just puts you in that moment. But then it also puts you in that moment of anxiety and just dread when you realize you're under the ice and like you're having almost like a nightmare, and like I don't know, it's amazing. And I think it can stand on its own too. Like yes, it's part of the narrative, but it's like a really cool song on its own. And I was doing a competition as Kate Bush, that a game that we play some in our community, and I remember that I was listening to that song for a theme that I was trying to play, and I kept listening to it over and over and over and over again, just as the song on its own, because it's just such a cool song. So that's the one I went with.
I remember that game too, and so I definitely got more appreciation from the song, even just from that. But my deep cut has actually already been mentioned. It's the other song on side A, Mother Stands for Comfort, the one that wasn't a single. And I never really hear it talked about other than that context. It's like the other song. But I've always loved it since I first heard it. It's like this beautiful, dark, moody track. And I really like the primary melody that it has going on. The double bass and synthesizer sound just sounds so cool working together there. So that's my deep cut pick. Mother Stands for Comfort.
Yeah, no complaints with any of those. Great choices. Kind of spoilt for choice on this album, because I think what is great about it is that you have, you know, those 4 singles which are all just irresistible pop songs, all 4 of them, and the rest of the album is this like treasure that you can sort of uncover. And even coming back to it, I'll be honest, even though I have it as a full score, there were songs I forgot about on that second side, because I've only heard it, like, this is probably my 3rd time ever hearing it in full. So it wasn't one I went back to loads, apart from, you know, my favorite tracks, but I knew I loved it. It was just going back, I was like, oh yeah, this song and this song. So it was kind of a very pleasant in that way. And then we go to the closing track, which is The Morning Fog, which yeah, I think it's a lovely way to close. It's sort of more akin to side 1. Really fun, kind of euphoric song. After, like Vanessa was mentioning, the anxiety that you get in a lot of side 2. Yeah, the lead acoustic guitar part is amazing, like so soft and beautiful, and a really nice sort of pulsing, I think it's a synth bass, or it might just be like a regular bass that's been sort of tweaked a little bit. But yeah, The Morning Fog, I think, is, yeah, pretty underrated, actually. I think it's a really good way to close. I think it kind of gets forgotten because it's not one of the singles and it's not one of the weirder songs, so people just kind of, yeah. But I think it's a really nice way to close, that sort of suite of the second side.
I do think it's an important song to close, and I think it's necessary, but it's probably my least favorite on the album, which it's still great. You know, this is one of my top albums of all time. So it's a minor quibble, but yeah, like, it has to be there because we have to resolve this story, and it's effective at that. It's perfect for that. But as a song on its own, it's probably the one that least stands out to me. But again, it's still great. Just it's in a stacked deck, right? So
Yeah, I don't know if the 2 of you will feel the same way, but of the 9th Wave tracks, this and maybe And Dream of Sheep, I feel like might be the most fitting comfortably with the style of side A. It's not quite as challenging of a song in that regard, but I think in the context of the story that she's telling, you need it here as this almost like this short, more optimistic close after, you know, some of the she's has her in the doldrums there at points earlier on in the end of that side B. So I think it works there as this kind of celebration of life, this morning fog that comes after the darkness that we heard.
Very good way of putting it, yeah. And then we have the impact on music history, which obviously we've already alluded to it, re-entering various charts and running up that hill, becoming #1 in 2022, sort of proves its longevity all on its own, because then you had people going back to the album, and, you know, I don't think it was a case of, you know, people going back to just that song. I think people have become Kate Bush fans, you know. It's not just a case of like, oh, that song takes away all the popularity, which is probably where that kind of thing can get frustrating, right, when you're a big fan of an artist. But yeah, I think there is like a kind of, not a stigma around this album, but I think there's like an element that there are people who are like, oh, well, but real Kate Bush fans actually have The Dreaming at #1 because it's way weirder. But I don't know, there's something to be said about this sort of beautiful blending of the bizarre and the accessible, because, you know, you talk about this has some of her biggest songs, but you compare this to the Kick Inside and it's so much weirder. Like, it's so much more quirky and out there, which yeah, I think it's just a testament to how she'd grown as an artist, and I think this is like her natural peak for me. with this album. Number 68 on the 2020 edition of the Rolling Stones Top 500 Albums. After they had their initial review, I don't know if you guys have read it, but it's pretty scathing, frankly, quite patronizing. In 1985, just sort of like, I think there was a quote that was like, Kate Bush is like the kid who just like, I'll have to get the quote up and put it on screen, but it was like just complaining that she's too quirky or whatever. And of course they backtracked on that and put it on their 500 favorite albums list, as they have done in the past. So, you know, whatever. And I think, you know, there's a lot of talk about how much this has influenced female solo artists like Lorde, you know, for example. A couple of her songs, her vocals sound almost exactly like Kate Bush. And that is true, but I think that's not the extent of it. I think it's easy for people to say like, oh, she's influenced this many female solo artists. But I think just music in general, pop music in general, you know, this has had a massive influence, I would say. And it's one of the most adventurous and daring pop albums you're likely to come across. Like Andrew said, you know, sort of starting off with Running Up That Hill, not only are you starting off with the first single, but you're also starting off with probably the most radio-friendly, accessible song. And then gradually it's just like more and more strange elements get added. So yeah, I think it's great. And I think you can't really understate the impact it's had on music since then.
Yeah, you can see elements of it everywhere, like, and different in different ways. Like, you can hear a lot of her vocal style in modern vocal styles of not just a lot of it would be a lot of female artists, but I think in a lot of artists in general, like you were saying, but also that whole like more adventurous pop music, like more adventurous synth-based pop music. You see so much more of that. And this album obviously isn't the only reason for that, but it's definitely a big part of that. And also the ninth wave on another side has had an influence, I think, on more art pop kind of artists. Like, I just listened to all of Bjork's catalog, and I think that approach is you can see that in her, the way that she approaches music. I'm sure she had many other influences, but I think it just kind of opened the door for people to be more open to stuff like that, and for it to be more popular, and just because I don't know that it was really as much of a thing in this way before this album. So I don't know. I think, yeah, you see it everywhere, and it's almost impossible for us in this little episode to really even get the tip of the iceberg, really. So.
Yeah, when I think of kind of the sound that she brought to the table, it's kind of like this big sound with some accessibility, with some, you know, more challenging aspects. You have like this singer-songwriter component mixed with like arty pop and these bold production choices. So I guess in that regard is where I feel she's like considerably a trailblazer. I mean, I think it is important to connote that she probably has an impact in terms of just being like this female artist who's doing all these things and making all these moves and changing the game of music. And there certainly would have been a lot of artists that followed in her footsteps in that regard. But just in general, she's bringing this new element to the table. And I think with the success that she did have, it's just says something that she's kind of transcended this like fluke return into something that's has audience appeal across all ages without having to put any qualifiers on it. She's just that good.
Yeah. So we all really like this album, but what do we think of the individual tracks? I think we'll go in the same order. I'll go first, then Vanessa, then Andrew, and I think we'll go by side. So we'll do side one each, and then we'll do side two each. So for me, side one, pretty much a slam dunk. Running Up That Hill, 10, already talked about it. Hounds of Love, also a 10. I think it's one of the best songs she ever did, but probably only like my fifth favorite song on this album. I think the strings sound incredible when they come in on this song, as they do on any song on this album, but in particular they sort of come in at a certain point on this song and they sort of like add a whole new element to it. I think her vocal performance has so much attitude on this song. I think more than any other song, like take your shoes off and throw them in the lake. That's like so cool. Yeah, so good. The Big Sky, also a 10. Not every song is going to be a 10, don't worry. To me, even better than the track just before it. So catchy. The fast acoustic guitar strums in the pre-chorus are so amazing. And that's sort of like I said, the Irish folk sort of chanting, which is going on, is really cool as well. Mother Stands for Comfort, I have as a 9. I think it's the least memorable of the iconic A-side, but I like what Andrew said about it. It's very ahead of its time sonically, I think. And this feels like a sound that a lot of 90s acts would sort of adopt for themselves. I sort of thought of like Portishead and Bjork when I was listening to this song. So yeah, obviously with a more sort of 80s-ified sound, but I could sort of hear the traces of it. And then Cloudbusting is my favorite song on the album, my favorite Kate Bush song. So it's got to be a 10. One of my all-time favorite songs by anybody. And the melody in its own is incredible, but the string section on this song really make it, you know, it's incredible. And also one of my favorite music videos ever as well. I really, really like the music video for this one. Really cool, really creative. Donald Sutherland's in it, which is kind of strange, but yeah. Side 2 I don't like quite as much as side 1, but that's just because side 1 sets the bar so incredibly high. So yeah, that's my ratings there.
So of course, Running Up That Hill, as we already talked about, that's a 10. Hounds of Love, I love how they transitions from Running Up That Hill. It's like it's just got such a bombastic intro and it flows perfectly. It's a tough act to follow, but I think it pulls it off incredibly. And I think it's just as good. It's a 10 for me. I love the energy. I love the imagery of the lyrics of the love being the hound that's chasing her. Like that's just such a cool approach. Like I've never heard anybody else describe it that way. It's just so cool. And then the Big Sky, keeps it going. Another solid entry. It continues this momentum of just banger after banger. I love how the song and the lyrics evoke the vastness of the sky and the openness of possibilities that are out there. It's just another 10, of course. Something unique, but also something so catchy and so accessible for just about anyone, I would say. And they all complement each other in a way without overwhelming each other, that's pretty difficult to pull off. And I also have Mother Stands for Comfort maybe as my least favorite of this side, but it's in such insane company, it's kind of impossible for much to live up to it. But I also think it offers a much needed reprieve at this point in the album. Like we needed something to kind of just bring down the energy just a little bit for a moment. It's a very interesting song from the perspective of a man who's committed a crime and how his mother is just gonna always be there for him no matter what he does. And it's not a heartwarming song. It's an unsettling song. And I think she makes that, like she conveys that so well, and the music does as well. It does remind me a little bit of like early 80s Peter Gabriel in a way, which makes sense because they work together, but definitely a cool song. It's a 9 for me. Cloudbusting is another one I've known for a very long time. I love this song. I don't know if it would be my favorite, but it's still top notch. It's another unique perspective song. It's taking inspiration from Peter, I think last name's Reich, his memoir and his relationship with his father, which is definitely a unique approach, a unique topic to write a song about. But it's just such a catchy song, and the way that she conveys the lyrics, you could almost take parts of the chorus and apply it to anything. Like for a long time, I knew the song and I really did not know what it was about or anything. Like, even with the music video, I didn't really put the two together. But I think that's a hard thing to pull off, to have a song about something specific, but also make it general at the same time. So that's also a 10 for me.
So I noticed that I think the two of you had the exact same scores. So I might mix it up a little bit, but spoiler alert, this has definitely got to be up there in terms of some of my favorite album sides ever. We'll start with Running Up That Hill, not much more to add on this one. Perfect song, 10 out of 10. Hounds of Love, I think it's basically following it up with pretty much more perfection. Drums and the drums and the strings kind of form this heart to it. And it's the first song I heard from the record. It's what made me want to check it out. It's another 10. So The Big Sky is going to be a 9. I like it a lot, just a little bit less than some of the other big songs on this side. My copy apparently has the single version on it, and I've heard 2 different versions. I think what's supposed to be the original album version is the one I prefer, but both great. Furious drumming on this, so yeah, 9 for that one. And this was my favorite deep cut for a good reason. Mother stands for comfort. After this run of epic sounding signals, we slow things down for pretty much the outlier of this side, but for the reasons I stated, I love it a lot. I'm gonna give that one a 10 and close things out with another like all-timer single, Cloud Busting. More amazing string work, kind of the most like Baroque pop of the lot here, I think. Despite all that, it might be the least reliant on production to bring out its beauty. For me, maybe this and Running Up That Hill. There's a fantastic build on this one, so close things out with another 10.
Yeah, nice. For those of you who don't know, Andrew is an even harsher grader than me, so this is big stuff. Side 2. This is going to be interesting. In fact, we might have a bit more differing opinions from what we talked about earlier. And Dream of Sheep is a 10 for me. One of my favorite Kate Bush songs. Under Ice I have as a 9. I think the strings are, again, a real highlight. More of it like a storytelling, atmospheric song. I was really keying into the lyrics on this one, which is probably a good sign. It's at that point of the album where you kind of need something a bit more reflective, I feel like. So yeah, works really nicely in the context of the album and is a good listen on its own. Probably works better in the context of the album, I would say. Then I got Waking the Witch, which is my least favorite. I have it as an 8. More experimental with the spoken word intro, sort of all these like spliced together voices. It's a bit odd. And I like how it works in the album context because it really sort of jolts you out of your seat after a couple Karma songs. It's like, yeah, Dream of Sheep and Under Ice are these like very reflective, mellow songs, and it's like, oh my god, what is happening? But yeah, it's pretty cool. 8 is still a good score, but on this album, it obviously can't compete for me. Then I got Watching You Without Me as a 9. I think the rhythm is really cool. I think it bounces along really nicely. The double bass on this track is really cool. Yeah, sort of that blending of the 80s synth pop and the sort of the Irish folk that she was experimenting with. Speaking of which, Jig of Life, easy 10 for me. Absolutely gorgeous. It's this romping sort of upbeat song. It's quite repetitive, really, but because the instrumentation and the melody is so infectious, I wish it would go on for even longer. I kind of just love this style of music. It kind of reminds me of Night of the Swallow from The Dreaming, which is my favorite song on The Dreaming. So obviously this was a slam dunk for me. And yeah, I especially like this kind of music when it has sort of an eerie edge to it, which I think this song does. It's sort of like this underlying sort of spookiness. Yeah, so good. And then Hello Earth, I sort of went back and forth between a 9 and a 10. I've settled on a 9, just because I don't think giving it the same score as my 10s would have been fair. This was one of the songs that I completely forgot about because it's sort of buried right at the end of the album and it's quite long. But yeah, I think it's one of my favorite arrangements on the album. It's cool to see her take on a longer track. That was my main sort of takeaway from it. And it sort of starts off fairly accessible and then it becomes sort of meditative and ambient in the second half of the song, which, yeah, quite the striking left turn within the song. So really cool. I think, yeah, I've got The Morning Fog as a 10 as well. I really like that song. I could definitely see it not standing out as much as some others on the album, but I was just completely drawn in this time around. I've been listening to it quite a bit. And I think the instrumentation coupled with sort of it being this like, yeah, like I said, euphoric last image of the album really works for me. So yeah, those are my scores for side 2. Not quite as glowing as side 1, but still pretty high.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to be as glowing as side 1. It's a totally different thing, and it's kind of hard. I found it a little difficult to rate the songs, or a little more difficult to rate the songs individually, because they work together so much as a whole, more so than side one. So, and Dream of Sheep is the beginning of this conceptual suite, of course, Person Alone in the Water. I think this song does an amazing job setting the scene, putting us in the person's head and seeing things from their perspective. The sound, the little sound effects and the tone of the piano, Kate's performance puts the whole picture in my mind. Like I can picture being alone at sea and in this traumatic situation and trying to comfort myself. Like she puts me there. So this song's a 10, of course. Under Ice, my favorite deep cut, also a 10. Waking the Witch, I love Waking the Witch. I think like it's a crazy song, but it's like it's the sound of someone hallucinating and like hearing all these different voices in this situation. It's got a dreamlike quality, but it's different than the previous song. It's more panic, it's more frantic, kind of sinister. That deep voice is really cool. Like I just love the way it all comes together. It effectively conveys the confusion of hallucinating in this situation and losing oxygen and being just, well, in dire straits, like basically. But this song puts you there. Like it does everything it needs to do. So this is also a 10 for me. Not everything's a 10 though. Story. Watching You Without Me is a different, kind of takes us to a different perspective of the situation. It's where she's imagining her life of the people around her without her. So it's a little more frantic. It's more numb and dreamlike. She's a ghostly figure in the song, and the song is ghostly as well. I think it conveys that effectively. And that at the end, those weird and muffly vocals signify her kind of coming out of the hallucination. And like there's little touches like the seagull sound that just sort of put you back in the setting. That's really cool. It is a 9 for me. I don't love it as much as the previous few, but it's still a great song. Jig of Life. This is awesome. It's her trying to fight for her survival, and her future self sort of fighting with her to try to keep her going. And you feel that like it's frantic. The fiddles kind of make you sound like make the sound of like the fight for your life type thing. And it like you said, it is repetitive, but it is effective. Like it's a very cool song. So I think, and it's also another one that sort of stands on its own outside the album a little bit, I think. So this is a 10 for me. And Hello Earth, that's sort of like this song where you don't know what's going to happen in the story. Like it could go either way. She could not come back from this, or she could. You don't really know. And I think it brings that sort of like with the Gregorian chanting and stuff, it kind of brings that quality of like, oh, she could be going to the other side type thing, and what's going to happen. And I really think that it does a great job of setting that scene. But it is kind of a, like you said, it's a long song. It's an effective song, but it is sort of like, it maybe goes on a little too long. I don't know. But it's a 9 for me still. I still really like it. And then we have the closing track, which I said was my weakest track, but it needs to be there. It does close the story effectively, and it does everything it needs to do. So it's an 8. It's still great.
Very nice. So yeah, like I find side B is where Kate's storytelling and dabbling in different styles really takes center stage here. At her best, I think she takes like these simple ideas and make them feel so imaginative and poignant. Obviously, this is the less commercial side, but it's one that becomes more enriching the more comfortable you get with it. And I think we get pretty much a lot of that. It's a little bit on the accessible side for this second half with the Dream of Sheep. But I'm going to give that one a 9 out of 10. I really like it a lot. And then we go to Under Ice, which I think is a cool song. Definitely one of the most memorable to me lyrically, just kind of this haunting, ghostly perspective element to it. I think it's pretty good. I'm going to give that one an 8. And then we move on to Waking the Witch. This is maybe the most challenging song on the record, certainly the most challenging so far up to this point. Reminds me the most of The Dreaming, maybe. there's beauty, but it's also not shying away from like this ugliness too. And it reminds me a little bit of the Suspiria theme. I don't know if either of you are familiar with that, but maybe with this witch component, that's even by design. I don't know. I think it's a good song. I tend to gravitate towards the more like slightly more conventional pop songs that she does. So I'm also giving it an 8, but I think it's a strong track. Watching You Without Me, kind of continuing this run of 8 out of 10s. I think it's a neat deep cut, almost a new agey sound of this one. More of that really cool double bass sound that I liked on Mother Stands for Comfort. Jig of Life, just when you thought that we got everything, she brings in this like Celtic folk infused track. I love how she sings it kind of like she does on the A side, but then we've got all these like fiddles and bouzouki things coming in, and so it's the creative choices that really define her. It's on something like this. So Jig of Life is another 8 out of 10 for me. And then we're down to the final 2, Hello Earth. We get some nice experimentation with style in the form of those like Gregorian chants interspersed in between. And then elsewhere, we settle nicely into this like piano ballad type. It has this majesty that I really like. So it's definitely up there for my side B 9th wave tracks. I'm gonna give that one a 9 out of 10. And finally, we're at the closer, which we talked about, another great song. Fiddling having this kind of epilogue feel to it. I really like it a lot. It's also a 9 out of 10. So none of the songs on side B quite reach the highs for me that they do on A, but I think it's really solid all around still and brings a lot of, interesting choices into the mix.
Yeah, very cool. As I suspected, more variety in scores on the second side. So yeah. Overall thoughts. I love this album. If you couldn't tell, one of my all-time favorites, one of my favorite albums of the entire 80s, one of my favorite albums of 1985. You'll have to wait and see to see where it lands there. And yeah, if you haven't heard it, give it a shot. You might not love the second side straight away, but you might. I did. So stranger things have happened. Yeah, easy 10 out of 10. Can't remember where I put it on my favorite albums list. Somewhere in the top 30, 40, something like that. So yeah, I mean, speaks for itself. Hounds of Love, one of the greatest albums of all time.
Yeah, it's up there as one of my top favorite albums, probably of all time. Like, I made sort of a list one time, sort of on the fly, and it ended up near the top. I've never made like a intentional official list, but yeah, it would be up there for sure. So unfortunately, that's a bit of a spoiler for our albums of the year, but then again, you never know, things could change, who knows, but it should be up there for sure.
It's a 10 for you?
Oh yeah, for sure.
I was like
yeah so it's a 10 in multiple ways, because we have your version of 10, and then I have my decimal out of 10 scale, and it's a 10 on there too, so it's
of course, yeah
10s across the board.
And I guess for me, to kind of, for Kate Bush in general, I always love when experimental artists go pop, or when pop artists go experimental, and I feel like Kate Bush is a perfect example of that. She kind of has straddled that line throughout her whole career, and I feel like this record might be even the defining example of striking that delicate balance. As I said, side A is up there among my favorite album sides all around. Hounds of Love as a whole probably wouldn't be that far behind. I mean, I'm kind of notorious for being stingy, as Tom said, with my like perfect score. So I don't know. It feels like a 9.5 to me. If you want to round up, you can call it a 10. So I guess that's the best I can do there.
Wow, how gracious of you. Well, yeah, thank you both for joining me. This is a blast. You'll be seeing plenty more of Vanessa. Hopefully, Andrew, you can come on again for something else another time. And it's very fun to do this. If you have any thoughts on Hounds of Love, we would love to hear them. What your favorite tracks, favorite deep cut maybe. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an album that is in the conversation, as people say. And we are happy to be continuing that. So I'm not sure when this is going to be out, but if you subscribe to the channel, you'll be press the little bell thing. You'll be kept up to date with everything I'm doing between albums and songs of the year with Vanessa and Chris, various discography rankings with different guests, Ryan, Sam, others. And yeah, hopefully we'll catch you soon for another episode of Anatomy of a Classic.